So my talk is going to be about women on the home front. I'm going to start with an overview of women's work, then I'm going to talk specifically about munitions, something about shortages, a little bit about leisure, pacifism, winning the vote, the Spanish flu, and how the war ended. So, a bit of background. There were three main subjects in the news that were dominating the news in the lead up to the war. One was women's suffrage, thanks to that magnificent publicity machine known as the Suffragettes. The second thing that was dominating the news was industrial relations. The decade before the war was this country's worst ever period of industrial relations, far worse than the 20s or 30s, far worse than the 80s, because there'd been huge inflation since 1900, but no increase in wages. Trade unions were growing. As a result, millions of man hours were lost to strikes. And thirdly, Ireland. The fight for home rule for Ireland dominated the news from 1912 to 1914. The Balkan Wars and German expansionism rarely made it onto the front pages of the newspapers. And yet, only 37 days after Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, Britain declared war on Germany. And as a result, there was little planning for the war, and suddenly there's huge upheaval. The stock exchange goes into meltdown. Everyone wants to sell their shares and buy gold, and pretty much most people are thrown out of work as factories and all sorts of big employers close down. There's huge economic uncertainty. Pre-war, there were 1.6 million women, that's about a quarter of the female workforce, in domestic service. And 90% of pre-war working women were single and overwhelmingly working class. Women in paid employment before the war totaled 6 million, during the war 8 million. So yes, it did go up about 30%, but not by perhaps the huge amount you might think. The big change in the war was the type of work that women did. In 1914, though, women's employment only rose by 400,000, compared to men's employment going up by 1 million. Only 80 out of the 2,000 women who immediately enrolled for war work on the outbreak of war actually got it. The government and unions were reluctant to give women work. Vacancies left by men going to the front were filled by men. But in March 1915, the Board of Trade appealed to women to take any employment.